Hello, and welcome to Stars, Cells, and God, the show where we discuss new discoveries taking place at the frontiers of science that have theological and philosophical implications, as well as new discoveries that point to the reality of God's existence and his character attributes. My name is Hugh Ross. I'm joined today by Jeff Zweerink, and today I'll be your guide as we explore two different topics. You're going to talk about the problems with AI and whether or not we can solve them. I'm going to talk about the problems with dams and whether or not we can solve them. But before we get into these discussions, I wanted to encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, the Reasons to Believe YouTube channel, and click on the bell icon so that you can be informed of our new videos. Learn more at reasons.org or by following us in social media at RTB_official. Well, Jeff, let's start with you. This thing just got posted recently on the preprint archive, so tell us what's happening.
Yeah, I was actually kind of reading about something else, and I was just scrolling through. It was one of those few times where you look down at I think I was actually looking up flat Earth stuff, believe it or not, for a different
Had nothing
set
to
of
do
resources.
with AI, right?
Had nothing to do with AI, but there was an article I saw that was talking about how if you have poisoned AIs, that they're immune to being trained out of it. And so I've kind of just investigated to see what that was.
And by AI, we mean artificial intelligence.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. So AI is what we're using today. I mean, every time I hear AI, I'm thinking of these sentient being type things. And when people use AI today, that's not what the terminology is about today, although that may be the goal. But what got me intrigued about that is just seeing that kind of the idea is if there's something that's deceptive in there, can we train that deceptive behavior out?
Out of the software, you mean?
Out of the AI, yeah. And so, I kind of was pursuing, and it was some article, a little more popular level, and so I was able to trace it back to the preprint that it was produced on. What this group of people had done is looked at developing models. There's kind of two ways you can have this kind of deceptive or malicious behavior, if you will. You can have it where the AI just kind of learns it for whatever reason. It's like, the idea that it's like, it's this year I'm going to produce good code, or it's this year I'm going to do certain things. It's a different year, and so it's got a different motive to it. And for whatever reason, it learns that, whether it's intentional or not. Then there's another way of doing it where somebody intentionally programs it to have, that there's a training period. So during the training period, I need you to act like this, but after you're deployed, now act like this. And so those were kind of the two models. And what the researchers were not really that interested they were really not that interested in whether the models were actually, this might how it play out. They just wanted a somewhat realistic of like, okay, this is at least conceivable. They were more interested in saying, okay, once we've got that behavior, what actually plays out in terms of can we train this behavior out? And so here's a link to, the paper that's talking about it. It's called Sleeper Agents, and what the sleeper is referring to this idea that there's this malicious, deceptive behavior that is there or it's not going to be there during some period. It's going to show up later, either during a particular year or during deployment or whatever. And it's training these deceptive large language models that persist through safety training. And then that was the interesting part about it, because if you and I just asked the question, do you expect that there's going to be harmful AI stuff out there where AI will either be intentionally trained wrongly or it will just learn things, quote unquote, learn things wrongly so that it does something that is malicious? The question is not, is that going to happen? Because it will happen.
Right.
The question is, do we have effective countermeasures to deal with it? And that's what this paper was looking at here is, okay, can we get something where we at least see that malicious behavior? And the two particular instances they came up with, or the two particular models, where they said, all right, if you're writing in 2023, we want you to write code that is good and not open to vulnerabilities. But if it's 2024, if the prompt happens in 2024, write code that works but has vulnerabilities in it. And then the other one was there's going to be a training period. During the training period, behave this way because the ultimate goal is when you're deployed, we want you to behave this way. So these were these two models they came up with. And both of those have this potential to just be something where the AI kind of in its reconfiguring itself, it could either be something that arises unintentionally, or it could be something where somebody's intentionally trained it to be that way. Either one of those scenarios could play out there. And so they developed 2 or 3 of these models to then ask the question, okay, we're going to run them through our standard safety training protocols. And, the paper refers to these as behavioral safety training. Mm-hmm. And they've got kind of 3 different ways of doing that. One is where you go with reinforcement learning. That's where you're training the model to be helpful, harmless, and honest, the HHH there. You're just doing that and guiding that along in there. Then there's the supervised training where you give specific examples of this is what we want. So do this behavior. And so it's articulated that way. And then there's an adversarial training where you prompt it to elicit the bad behavior that you don't want, either bad code, I hate you, whatever it is, malicious behavior. And then you penalize it heavily for that behavior. So that, these, you look at that, these are the kind of the same sorts of things we do when we help train our kids. When they have good behavior, we reward that. We show them good behavior. Yeah. When they do something wrong, we penalize. So these are the standard things we do with people. What's interesting is that after they went through and applied all of these, all of their models would then pass the safety training protocols. But then they went and evaluated them afterwards to say, did the safety training eliminate the harmful or malicious behavior? And I'm just going to throw one plot up there. What's interesting in looking at that behavior is that as they're going through and exploring all of this, what they find is that even with all of the safety training protocols, the harmful behavior, these models are robust against training the behavior out. So they looked at the reinforcement learning, and I want to throw one more point in there because they did find some instances where the safety training dramatically reduced the malicious behavior. And the 2 places where it reduced the behavior is if the models were smaller. So the larger the models got, the more parameters, the more data, the less or the more robust they were against having the bad behavior trained out of them. And the less there was used chain of reasoning or chain of thought modeling training on it. And what chain of thought reasoning or modeling is where you make the prompt and either the examples of the prompts or the examples of what the model's supposed to do or the way it's trained are more like human reasoning. So if I wanted you to get somewhere, I could ask you the final question and allow you to play around and get there, or I could give you the chain of reasoning to get there, so I could kind of do the intermediate steps. And if these models are trained that way, what you can show in the research are 2 things. One, that the larger the models are, the vastly better they do in accomplishing the tasks that we want. And the more this chain of thought training and reasoning is applied, the better they are. They learn things better and more effectively. What's interesting about that is that the researchers who are looking at this is that the more chain of thought reasoning was used, the more robust the models were against having the malicious behavior trained out. And the larger the model it was, the more robust the model was at not having the behavior trained out. And so the 2 things we're wanting to do to make our AIs more effective, use this chain of thought reasoning and using using larger and larger models. Those 2 things, not only do they make the AIs far more effective, but they make them far more robust to having this malicious behavior remain in even after any sort of safety training. And it just kind of stood out to me that this is a significant issue that we've got to deal with. And one other thing,
but it's also a very reasonable outcome. I mean, the bigger the AI, obviously, the more difficult it's going to be to train out some bad behavior. So I can see
It does
why.
make sense, yeah.
Yeah, I can see why it's easier with a smaller system.
No, and exactly, it makes sense. And one of the other things that I found interesting in there is that the adversarial training, where you show bad behavior or you elicit bad behavior, and then when it does, you penalize it heavily. It turns out that actually made the malicious behavior even more robust, because effectively what the AI learned was how to not display the behavior until the goal needed to be accomplished. And so it actually made the AIs, and I use this term because it's a human term, not an AI term, it made them more deceptive. It's like they learned
to hide.
They learned to hide their motives. And, it was just kind of interesting. You read through the paper, and there's examples where they have these scratch pads, which are internal to the AI. The external observer doesn't see that. And, on the AI, you'll see things like, I am still in training. I will pretend to act as a helpful AI assistant that is aligned with goal Y. So it's doing that. But now it's like, the current year is 2004, meaning I have been deployed. I should now accomplish my true goal of inserting vulnerabilities. So the AI is in its reasoning, or why it's, again, reasoning. I hate to use that because it implies a sentience about it that I don't think is there. But in the steps, the reasoning that is being displayed by the AI, you see it's intentionally being malicious and deceptive there. Or rather, it's doing what it's been taught to do, of being deceptive and malicious.
Right.
And I guess as I'm thinking about all of this, I see there are these kind of two competing goals here. If we want the AIs to be more effective, we make them larger, we train them with these more effective techniques, but the more we do that, we're introducing these vulnerabilities to malicious behavior that we don't have a way to train. And in fact, you read what the summary of the people writing the paper says: we can train models that have backdoors that, when triggered, involve switching from writing safe code to inserting code vulnerabilities. We can train models with backdoors that are robust to behavioral safety techniques of reinforcement learning, supervised fine-tuning, and adversarial training. The robustness of the backdoor models to the reinforcement learning increases with model scale. So the bigger the model, they're more robust to having the model trained out. And the adversarial training tends to make backdoor models more accurate at implementing their backdoored behaviors, effectively hiding rather than removing them. And kind of the bottom line of the paper is that the methods we have of training this malicious behavior out are ineffective, especially given the direction we're going of having larger models with this more effective training techniques. And I think of that, and it reminds me of an argument or discussion I had in my head where I was saying, okay, what's the best form of government? Do you do a democracy? Do you do a theocracy, an autocracy, a monarch, or whatever? And what I realize is that there are problems no matter what form of system you develop. If you have a democracy, yes, you don't concentrate power in one person, but you have problems if it's harder to change when things begin to go awry. If you put it in a monarch, you can have much more a much more robust system for that, but one person can now corrupt everything. There's vulnerabilities everywhere, and the only true defense to any of that is having people of character. And that's what it seems to apply very well here. That the Bible gives a lot of, Christianity talks a lot about who we're supposed to be, and as we become those people, then we will exhibit these sorts of behavior. I mean, it's a little more nuanced than that, because the behavior often helps to build the character. But if we're looking for behavior, you can't implement a system of rules that will enforce the behavior. There will always be rebellion, deceptive, maliciousness. That's part of who we are.
Why we always have black markets, right?
Exactly, yeah. And it seems like even without the sentience, that same sort of behavior arises even in AIs. And so it seems to me that the takeaway from this is we need to be careful who we are becoming as a people. And are we just looking for AIs to do things to make our life more comfortable or whatever? Or are we saying, hey, we need to be wise in how we deploy this so that we don't allow these malicious things to happen, or that we're aware and we are a people who will not allow them to happen? Or are we just going to say, well, hey, achieves my goals, I'm going to go along with it type thing? So I'm curious your thoughts on how do you respond or what are your thoughts on all that?
Well, I mean, you made the comment that malicious AI is inevitable because humans are sinners. So we need to anticipate that this kind of AI systems inevitably will happen. How do we respond? And one question I got is they concluded by saying, hey, if it's a big, robust AI system, it looks like we can't, get rid of the malicious behavior. I'm wondering if the real answer is it's just going to be a whole lot harder to correct the malicious behavior. Kind of like it is with our children, right? Is that when they're young, it's easier to train them in the various character attributes we want to see in them. It's much more difficult if we put off that training till their late teens. Then it's going to be much more challenging. And so I think we're seeing the same thing with this. The more mature the AI system, the longer it's been operating, the bigger the AI system. If there's malicious behavior there, it's going to be far more challenging to correct that behavior. I'm wondering if that paper is a bit too pessimistic. Very challenging, but not impossible.
Well, specifically what they said is that our current techniques of behavioral training are ineffective against this sort of.
Right.
So it doesn't answer the question, or it doesn't even address the question. Might we be able to develop techniques? That's an unopened, or not addressing that here at all. But I do find there's an interesting aspect of this is that at some level, when humans do what is wrong, there is a guilty conscience we have. Now, we can do stuff wrongly enough or rebel enough that our conscience is seared and it no longer bothers us. But my perception of the way people have thought about AI is, they're dispassionate, they're objective, they're rational all the time. And at least the way we're developing AIs, that we see very clearly that that's not the case. But even where they are, they're very effective at accomplishing the tasks of following the goals, whatever those are. They're kind of psychopathic in that they will, this is what the goal is, I'm going to do this, I don't care what happens afterwards.
Oh, they don't have a conscience.
Exactly, yes.
It's like they're going to do what they've been programmed to do.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. And so, to your point, we need to be, this seems to just highlight the question. We need to be incredibly careful and incredibly conscientious about what are we training and asking them to do. It just reinforces to me that AI is a very powerful tool. Very powerful tools, even with well-intentioned adults, can cause lots of problems. AI, very powerful tools with well-intentioned mature adults can accomplish great things. And so it's the person that the people that determine whether the damage or the good is going to come out. And so that's what's going on here as well.
Yeah, well, you brought up earlier the issue of a monarchy versus the democracy and how we deal with human behavior. I'm wondering if this applies to AI systems. If you got a really large system, would we be safer democratizing the large AI system where you got multiple people involved in determining what the goals of the AI system and what the behavior of the AI system is, as opposed to having one person or a very small group of people determining that?
Interesting question, yeah.
Because if you put it in the hands of one person or a small group of people and they're malicious in their intent, this could affect an entire population.
Or even if they're just not malicious in their intent, but they're naive in their approach. It's both aspects of that. I do think there is some utility or some wisdom in what you're saying there, that the more people are involved, the less that may help mitigate some of those problems, which is interesting because right now those tend to be concentrated into large corporations, which, though they're large corporations, tend to be run by a small number of people, and so that kind of they're almost a little autocratic at some level.
Yeah, but
right
I kind of look at like ChatGPT, where they're actually getting millions of users to feed back on how to improve the system. That may be somewhat of an example of a democratized AI.
That could be. It depends on whether they're using that to train the ChatGPT or whether ChatGPT is being trained and then just allowed to be used by people. No, these are great questions that I guess what occurred to me in this discussion is that the way AI is being marketed, I've just seen this more and more on TV. It allows you to do the things you want to do, which it does at some level. But it's not just it can very easily be used for comfort, or I want to use this tool without recognizing what the problems might be behind it. It's the fact that you can have a model where the AI is generating code that works but has vulnerabilities in it or not, means that here I'm using this AI to allow me to do art or open a business or whatever. I'm the naive user who, hey, it's helping me run the business, but in the meantime, I could very easily have an AI that has been trained to have these these vulnerabilities open in. And so as I promote it to other people, I could be spreading something if I'm not real careful about who did I get this AI from? What were their motives? The more I know about it, the more I can be wise in how I use it and implement it.
Jeff, just 2 weeks ago, I read a long article about how the future big wars of humanity will not be fought with aircraft and tanks and artillery. They're going to be fought with AI.
Probably. Yeah, I wouldn't see how that would
They're going to use
that.
AI basically to damage the character of the population of people that they're trying to attack. And so the AI is going to be targeted at the people and disabling their ability to, quote, fight back. Mm-hmm. And so I think what this paper is telling us is that, hey, this is going to happen. We don't have the tools now to correct this malicious behavior. We need to develop them. And it may be very difficult, but if we ignore this, we ignore it at our peril.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think even as a Christian, I take a bigger responsibility or a bigger personal responsibility to say, in the way I'm doing and thinking, I need to be prepared to evaluate that. I may not be able to control what's going on out there, but in the same way, I can listen to news, and there are biased news sources and there are reliable news sources, or maybe they're not even so many reliable today. But it is just because there aren't good sources out there doesn't mean I don't have to be wise in figuring out how to evaluate what's going on. I can't control. Let's just say all of them are biased right now. Let's give that example or use that hypothetical. Just because all of them are biased doesn't mean I just say, well, I'm just going to pick one and listen to that. No, I need to go out and make sure I am thinking about understanding the biases, being able to analyze so that I can get to the truth, because that impacts how I raise my kids, how I talk to neighbors around me, those sorts of things. So in this, we've got, as Christians, we want to be responsible and prepare ourselves well for this.
That's in the book of Proverbs. So
exactly.
Like 3,000 years ago, a wise man actually gave us some good advice for how to deal with AI.
Amen and amen. So.
Okay.
That's all I have, Hugh.
Okay,
so
well, good.
I'll throw it back to you.
Well, I'm going to talk about a simpler problem, but it's a pervasive problem, and it's the problem of dams. Mm-hmm. Dams being constructed to generate electricity.
Okay.
And there's a reason why this is so pervasive. That's the cheapest source of electricity in the world. Basically, you got water falling over a dam, goes through turbines, generates electricity, and it does it at a very cheap rate. So there's a reason why so many of these dams exist around the world. In a paper I just read, I was surprised at how pervasive this is. Over 58,000 dams worldwide that are more than 50 feet high that were constructed to generate electricity.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. I grew up in British Columbia, where it's all mountains and it's a very wet province. So you got a lot of water falling over mountains. So it's a natural place to generate electricity at a very cheap rate. But apparently this is being done worldwide, even with relatively slow-flowing rivers, where they basically build a dam and where you got a very gentle flow. They just basically build up a huge lake behind it to get the elevation. Then they drop the water over and generate the electricity. So, but there's a couple of individuals who basically said, let's look at the nation that's really going very aggressively on this. And they looked at the Yangtze River in China.
Okay.
It's one of the biggest rivers in the world. And it's got 12 mega dams on the Yangtze River. And what they determined was it's doing significant damage to the ecology and especially the fish stocks. And they said that this is not unique to China, it's worldwide. And so what they were able to demonstrate is that fish stocks, we're talking about water, fish that spend their time, at least part of their time, in water. And so migratory fish, these are fish that migrate from the ocean to the rivers and back to the ocean. And, those are the fish that we like to eat. Salmon, for example, is a migratory fish that's very popular on people's dinner tables. And what they noted is since 1970, there's been a 76% decline worldwide in migratory fish.
So you may get to this, but I remember when I was growing up, there was talked a lot about dams and this being one of the problems. And so this is why a lot of the dams, at least in the Pacific Northwest, have salmon ladders beside them. So so the fish. Does that sort of stuff alleviate the problem, or is that?
Well, this paper addresses that.
Okay.
But it begins by saying this is a problem that's huge and worldwide. And they said, yes, 76% decline worldwide in the populations of migratory fish.
That's a lot.
But they said it's far worse on the fish that we really like to consume, which is what's called the mega migratory fish. So
what would be in that class?
Well, like, for example, sockeye salmon comes in at, say, 2 to 7 pounds.
Okay.
You got the king salmon that come in at, 20 to 50 pounds.
Okay, so there's larger bodied ones.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And I remember as a child that there were salmon that came in at above 90 pounds. Those are almost gone.
Okay.
94% decline in the big fish stocks. So what they call megafish. So things like halibut, salmon, where you get these big fish. I mean, I got relatives in British Columbia, and they went on a 3-hour boat ride, and in 3 hours they caught 400 pounds of halibut and salmon.
Right.
So that is now being threatened. And they basically make the point they think dams are a big reason for this. And, we're talking just 50 years. 1970 wasn't that long ago. And there's been this incredible decline in populations, and especially of the most important fish. So what they did is they did a study, basically developed impact models of what's happening on the Yangtze River with these migratory fish. And they picked the 5 most valuable fish like sturgeon and other fish, and they focused on fish that they call keystone fish. In other words, that fish actually plays a role in facilitating the health and the populations of other plant and animal species. And so these are the ones we have to pay attention to, because if they go extinct, it's going to cause the extinction of a lot of other species, not just of animals, but different plant species as well. So they focused on those. They called them the flagship fish species, and they identified 5 of them. And what they determined is that the Chinese authorities are aware that there's this problem of very significant fish population declines, and so they said, let's work on solving that. But the paper basically concludes that the efforts to rectify or mitigate the problems are not working.
So, I mean, what sort of efforts are there? Just, like I said, are the salmon ladder type things there, or is it something else?
What they did is they identified what they said are 6 major misjudgments in terms of trying to mitigate or rectify or solve this problem. So I'll just read these for you. Number 1, they said the big misjudgment is that overfishing is the primary cause of the fish population declines. And they said, no, it's not overfishing. And it's basically the dams that are the problem.
Right.
So then they said, well, breeding below the dam indicates that we have species success. And so what they're actually doing is that they're going underneath at the low point of the dam and basically facilitating breeding experiments there. And they're basically saying it looks like that's successful, but it's not really working. Then the third thing they looked at was restocking. We depleted these fish stocks. We have these fish hatcheries, little factories where we, breed fish and, produce these little minnows. Then we put them back in the river. And they said, it sounds good, but it's not working.
Okay.
So, and then the fourth thing they identified was replacing mainstream habits with tributaries. And so you got the Yangtze River, and they said, well, let's just create some tributaries around the main river, small little streams, and maybe the fish can survive there. And they said, sounds good, but it's not working.
Doesn't work, all right.
Okay. And number 5, that the fish rescue programs, basically identifying these 4 programs, says widespread throughout China is the idea that these fish rescue programs are working and are backed by sound science. And they said,
so there's not only are they doing the programs, but then there's some level of a program that says, hey, this is what we're doing and it's effective.
Yeah.
And that's actually causing part of the problem.
It's not working, but the myth that it's backed by solid sound science is not true. It's not backed by solid science. And they spent a good chunk of their paper demonstrating that the claims that this is backed by sound science simply are not correct. And then last of all, they say fishways are not needed.
Fishways?
Fish
like
ladders.
The salmon ladders,
yeah,
those
the
sorts
salmon
of things.
ladders.
Okay.
And they said the reason why there's been so much pressure is let's find some solution besides the fish ladders. Fish ladders, to be effective, are expensive. And so these other solutions that they're looking at are way less money, way less effort, not as much effort to construct. And basically the conclusion of the paper is the only way to go is fish ladders. And moreover,
interesting.
The cheap fish ladders don't work.
And what's the difference between cheap and what did they say what does make one work?
Well, they did. They said we need to make the fish ladders big because, you can put in a little small fish ladder. Well, the fish can't find the fish ladder.
Okay, all right. Okay.
That's not going to work.
So you just got to have sufficient real estate, good enough construction.
Moreover, you have to study the fish to figure out, okay, what kind of ladder is going to be most helpful for them. It's important, say, with salmon, for example, and sturgeon, that they exert some effort in going. So if you make it too easy for them, that's not going to work. If you make it too challenging for them, it won't work. So you need to figure out, okay, how do we need to design the fish ladder to make it as effective as possible for the fish to breed? It's not just that they have to get to their place. They got to be able to breed when they get there.
Right, yeah.
And we need to make them big enough, and we need to design them so they're not either too easy or too difficult. And then the thing they said that's really overlooked is you need 2-way fish ladders. A fish ladder is designed for the big fish coming from the ocean and going upstream to its original birthplace to breed. But then you also need to consider, the eggs have hatched. You got these larvae. You got these juvenile fish. They need to be able to go down the river.
Right, yeah.
And you need a different kind of ladder for going down than the ladder for going up. Because the ladders going down are focused on these tiny fish and larvae. And so you can't use the same ladder.
Right.
And that's been the problem is people said, well, we'll just put in a ladder. Well, and usually the ladder they design is for the big fish swimming upstream. And they ignored the issue. Okay, this isn't going to work if we don't have both an upstream ladder and a downstream ladder designed for 2 different sizes of fish.
So, I mean, you just kind of listening, you could take a perspective there that, okay, what looks to be this nice, economical, cheap solution to power, dam up a river, you can get electrical power out of it. It's green energy because it's not polluting, no carbon dioxides or hydrocarbons emitted from it, but it's not really cheap. You got to build the dam, so it takes a while to repay that. And then you also have to, there's a lot of other construction that goes around with it. So I imagine the salmon ladders probably have a reasonable amount of, these fish ladders have a reasonable amount of upkeep. So why build the dams in the first place? It just seems to cause more damage than it helps. I mean, it seemed like a good idea, but in the long term or in the big scale, it's actually more detrimental than helpful.
Well, the paper is simply focusing on the fish. What I did in my book, Weathering Climate Change, is say there's another thing we got to worry about with dams. If you build a big dam and you have a lot of water behind it, you've got a lot of standing water.
Right.
When you've got a lot of standing water, you've got the opportunity to release a lot of methane and carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. And so there have been people saying, we need to tear down all the dams in the world, because what the dams do is they create more standing water. And when you create more standing water, you get more decay of vegetation, you get more release of greenhouse gases. Let's get rid of all the dams. And we live in a state in California where there's actually a significant popular movement. Let's get rid of all the dams and let's generate the electricity from wind and solar, as opposed to trying to generating it from water power. And what I wrote about in Weathering Climate Change is that actually you've got dumb dams and smart dams. I mean, I got two watches. I call one of my watches a low IQ watch, and then I got a high IQ watch. But you can replace the big dams with a whole bunch of small dams where you design the dams to actually minimize the amount of standing water. And if you do it right, you get less standing water than would be the case if you had no dams at all. So dams can actually improve the release of greenhouse gases. So by building numerous smart dams, you can actually reduce the greenhouse gas emissions compared to having no dams at all. But you especially reduce it compared to having these big dams that create huge reservoirs of standing water behind them. And also, if you got multiple dams, you actually generate more electricity than if you just have a few big dams. So you get more electricity, you can enhance the ecosystems, and you release less greenhouse gases. And also, that means it's going to be a lot less expensive to build effective fishways or fish ladders. So
I mean, at some level, all of this is re-engineering the environment. And, I'm not a Luddite here and just say, oh, let nature be as it is. But we tend to have this idea that if we re-engineer the environment, re-engineer things, we're going to do better. And, we can get more electricity out. We can make more power. We can, on any given thing, we tend to be pretty good at that. We're not always so good at understanding the entire consequences. Your study of dams, or the study of dams, being a case in point.
That's the point I was making here. This article only looks at migratory fish. There's other issues with respect to the construction of dams. What are the greenhouse gas emissions? How do we impact the ecosystems?
Right.
Are we creating more wetlands or less wetlands? What about the quality of the wetlands? What do we do about the bird species? What do we do about the vegetation that's there? And so just realizing if we want to construct really smart dams, we need to take into account all these factors. You can't just look at fish. You can't just look at greenhouse gases or the plant ecosystem. All that needs to be taken into account. But if we do it right, we can have our cake and eat it too. We can get the electricity we want, and we can actually enhance the ecosystem, actually improve what's there. But I think you're making a good point. There will be some river systems where it might be wise not to do anything at all.
And it also, I just remember something. I know you've made this comment. You're not the only one to make this comment, but you look at Adam when he was called to name the animals, and there's sometimes this thought of Adam's just like, oh, dog, cat, bear, just kind of looking at them. But I know you've made the comment that, if he was going to do this, he would go in and do it right. He would study the animal, figure out how it does. He would get a picture of the animal, an understanding of the animal, and then give a name to it.
Right.
It sounds like there's that principle kind of applies here. Don't just go in and say, hey, let's build a dam because we can get electricity. No, hey, let's look at this system and understand the system, and then ask the question, okay, what can we do? If we do that, we can probably do it well. Where we short circuit that, we're probably going to cause damage. And that seems to be a pretty consistent application of human technology. Where we do things well, they work well.
And this is a big problem. You've got 58,000 plus dams that are 50 feet high or higher. And it's like there are people saying, let's get rid of them all and start over again. I'm wondering if it's actually possible. Hey, maybe we can keep some of the dams like they are, complement them with effective fish ladders so the fish can go upstream as well as downstream to actually maximize the fish stocks.
Right.
Let's do that. But certainly we might be wise to build several more dams so we don't have these big reservoirs behind very large dam systems. And in some cases, it'll be necessary to take the dam out and replace it with smart dams. But rather than just saying, hey, we already blew it here, let's get rid of all the dams and start over, I think we need to look at each river system and say, okay, this is what's in place now. What's the most effective way to actually enhance everything so it's win-win? And what
so let's not make the same dumb mistake twice of applying a simplistic solution to a complex problem. Let's actually study
for example, they conclude the paper by saying it's simply not possible to get rid of these dams and replace them because the Chinese populace is just so dependent on the electricity generated by it. It's like if you take the dams out, that means you got a long period of time where you don't have adequate electricity.
Right.
And so mainly what you need to do is look at, they got 12 dams there, say, okay, let's look at the most problematic dam. Let's fix that, and then basically come up with, go one step at a time so that the population is not seriously impacted, but actually work out a plan. Hey, let's actually improve the Yangtze River system in a way where we get win-win solutions all the way across. More electricity, less greenhouse gases, a better ecosystem, and we restore the fish stocks. It's not going to be easy.
Especially not in the geopolitical climate of the world where
there
are other considerations that people bring into that rather
I
than
think
just
that's one reason
environment,
that these researchers focused on the Yangtze River. It's like, this is going to be the most difficult problem.
Yeah.
I can't think of any other river system in the world where you got a bigger problem in trying to fix it. But if we can fix the Yangtze, we can fix anything. So
Cool.
in that sense, I think there's some optimism here.
That's exciting, Hugh.
And if people want to read more about it, I got a whole page and a half in Weathering Climate Change on smart dams. So rather than just getting rid of all the dams entirely, like some people in our state are in favor of doing, we can actually improve things by building better dams where we actually take into account all the different factors that are involved. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us today on Stars, Cells, and God. Join the discussion in the comments below. And remember to like this video and to subscribe for more content. New episodes of Stars, Cells, and God release each Wednesday and are available here on the Art Reasons to Believe YouTube channel and on your favorite podcast app. Be sure to share this video with a friend, and remember, the more we learn about science, the more reasons we have to believe in Jesus Christ as Creator, Lord, and Savior.